Welcome to episode 55 of the Camerosity Podcast, the world's #1 open source film photography podcast. After an extended summer break, the guys and I are back with season 3 of the show, which is certain to be full of a whole lot of camera gas discussion, inside jokes, and all-around tomfoolery. My name is Mike Ekman, and joining me on this fine September evening, slowly digging himself out of Leica apocalypse, is Paul Rybolt. Hey Paul, have you been able to get rid of all those black Leicas?
I haven't gotten rid of them. I still got the black paint M4, but I got rid of all 3 of the black paint M10s.
What a burden.
It's a burden, but somebody's got to shoulder it.
Next, from Gainesville, Florida, a man who, as a small business owner, always has lots of free time on his hands, Mr. Anthony Rue. What is it like owning your own coffee shop, a place that basically runs itself without any input from you?
Oh, I'm just glad that we are a coffee shop, because without espresso, I would be nothing. I would just be, you'd be scraping me up off the floor after about the hour 10 or 11 or 12 of each day.
And finally, from Sydney, Australia, a land where it literally goes from winter straight to extreme summer heat, is Theo Panagopoulos. Hey Theo, do you have any upcoming travel plans to get away from the extreme Australian heat?
Yeah, I think I might have to go up north into the northern hemisphere soon just to get a break from it. We're hitting 35 degrees today, which I think is about 93 in your language, and it's third week into spring, so summer started very early here.
Traveling is a good segue into one of the topics we thought we would talk about tonight, travel and photography. What are your favorite cameras to take on trips? How do you decide what goes and what stays? And what kinds of tips do you have for dealing with airport security? But first, we have some people in the waiting room, so let's open the doors and let them all in.
That was a smooth segue.
That was good.
I was hoping you'd say something like you did, so it worked out perfectly.
Oh, full house again.
Yeah, we got
So much for my bore.
All right, we have a full house of people. We have some returning guests, some familiar faces. Howard Sandler, Patrick Rapps is back, Mark Faulkner, Miles Lieback. I do see a couple names I don't recognize. Mina, is that?
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah. Hey, do you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Mina. I'm a next door neighbor to Theo in terms of being in Sydney. First time caller, but very long time listener.
Awesome. Well, glad to have you. We have Kevin K. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Hey, everyone.
I don't recognize you. Looks like you're in a car.
I am in a car. I'm outside my daughter's dance studio, which is normally where I'm sitting during the week. I'm just outside St. Louis, Missouri, though, for the most part. I'm in Southern Illinois.
All right. Maxwell, you've been on the show before, haven't you?
Hello. Yeah, I have. I was plagued by technical issues last time, but I think everything's going to be fine tonight.
All right. And John Roberts, welcome to the show, John.
For having me. You hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes,
Sounds
we can.
Perfect.
All right. Well, welcome, guys. For those of you who've been on the show, you know how this works. If this is the first time being on the live recording, just know that we do a lot of editing. So there's going to be some dead spots. There's going to be some points where we trail off into topics that get removed. So you get to see a little behind the curtains of how these shows go. But we're back. This is season 3. We pondered a whole bunch of changes. We were going to replace all the hosts. I did some auditions for a new theme song. We were thinking of switching topics altogether and just decided to do nothing different. And we're just going to keep doing the same stuff we've been doing, which is fine by me. So I'm really happy to be back. I personally just been so busy. This summer has been nuts. We kind of talked a little bit on the Unplugged show. That truly was spontaneous. I mean, that's always been the theme of this show ever since Cocaine and Waffles. But even though we were away, Anthony, Theo, Paul, and I continue to stay in touch, through Facebook, and we would chit and chat. And one night we were all free and we're like, hey, let's just record a quick show. So we kind of just did that. We didn't really invite anybody else. We didn't even make the show announcement public at all. So that was a lot of fun. So for tonight, we're going to start off talking about travel and photography. What kinds of cameras do you bring on trips? How do you make the decision on what you bring with you? What stays home? Maybe for those of you who've traveled through airports recently, what kind of tips and tricks do you have for getting through airport security? That seems to be kind of a common question that I see get asked in a lot of the film photography groups, because with digital, generally, you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. I always think it's kind of cool. Like when I'm waiting in security, you still see the little signs on the wall about film. When I see that sign, I always wonder how many, younger people see that and don't even know what that's a picture of. What does that mean? Theo's got a trip coming up soon. So Theo, have you started to kind of put together a wish list of what you're intending on bringing?
Yeah, we're looking at going back into Asia, and I'm starting to look at what I want to take. And what I did earlier in the year is I had a trip to Vietnam and took a Nikon FE, the Nikon L35 AF and the Ikonta C 6x9. And I found that to be a pretty good combination, the FE being rugged, changing lenses, etc. I did take a micro four thirds camera as well as a bit of a backup with one lens, just so I could sort of adapt onto that with the Nikon lenses. It worked out a good combination, but I think with this trip coming up, I want to be a little bit more rangefinder focused. So I'm starting to look at which rangefinder I want to take, maybe one of the Leicas, a couple of focal lengths, and then I do want to consider what I want to take from a medium format. And again, it'll probably be a folder because they're just so convenient, like one of the Super Ikontas again.
You always try to bring at least one digital on a trip?
I do, but I try to keep that small. So it'll either be one of the little compact digitals. In fact, that's a good segue. We're talking about a trip that Anthony's got coming up to Japan, I think. And one of the cameras that he was talking about is the Lumix LX series. I think he's got the LX1. I've got the LX3 here. That's actually a good option because it shoots raw, it's compact, fits in almost any pocket, and it's just the quality is just out of this world. So it depends what I want to do. If I want to adapt lenses, I'll tend to stick to the micro four thirds because it's just so small, and I want to focus on film personally.
Anybody, one of our listeners, what do you guys think? Who's taken a trip recently, and what was your process?
I think John, you were down here, weren't you?
I was. I went and visited you there for an
That's
evening
right.
there, Theo. I was just actually in Australia. I live in Vancouver, BC, and I was down in Australia, Sydney, for 3 weeks and had a meetup with Theo one evening. And I did go through a lot of stress of what I was going to pack. And I ended up taking one digital camera, my Nikon Z5, and then I had my Canon F1, and then I shared the same 3 lenses between the 2 cameras. So I had a 24 3.5, a 55 1.4, and a 85 1.9, all Super Tax M42s, and then I had the adapter to fit the the Canon F1.
It's a good selection. I gave you a thumbs up on the Z5 for us Americans. I've had this camera now for a little bit. I've had Fuji mirrorless, I've had Sony mirrorless, and they're all great. I mean, they're great things. They're all going to make awesome images. But for my money, in terms of full frame digital mirrorless, I'm going to declare the Z5 as the best bargain camera out there. Nikon took away just enough to keep the cost down. Like, it doesn't have the top LCD screen. It just has physical knobs, but they retain the same sensor and processor as the Z6. It has, I believe, the exact same EVF. It's a heck of a camera, and you're already starting to see used copies of Z5s for under $1,000 out there. So that's my choice too. So I'm answering one of my own questions. When I do go on trips with film cameras, I do try to bring at least one digital. I don't, it's not like I don't want to shoot digital, but with kids and stuff like that, it is nice to have something that if I want to hand it to somebody else, just put it on full auto and not have to explain, to anybody how to use digital. But that's a good call.
John, you were down here. I was actually up in Canada last year, and what I chose to take was an f801 with 2 autofocus lenses and the Hasselblad, and I ditched digital entirely because I was surrounded by family, and every family member has the latest iPhone or Samsung, and therefore I'm pretty much 110% covered that digital images from every angle are going to be taken, and they're going to be shared quite quickly, and they're going to be editable. I don't do any really post editing, so I tend to rely wholly on the lab. I may crop later if I really feel like it. So I sensed that just focusing on the quickest usage cameras for family snapshots, and that would have been the f801, or if I was feeling a bit more arty and going into the city of Toronto or into Mississauga or into city of Montreal, I would take the Hasselblad, and it could all fit quite neatly into a backpack. But to come back to your question, Mike, getting through airports, I think you just needed to be really nice, really well prepared. So turn up early with the film in a clear bag. Don't make it difficult for the people who are doing the scanning. At times, all of my camera gear would be pulled out of the bag because it looked pretty suspicious, having these boxes with lenses and the amount of space it was taking up in the bag versus my actual clothing. So they often would be like, you need to take that out and show it to us, and they'd swab it. And how I look physically isn't really that comfortable for a lot of people as they go through airports. But overall, I think once you make it easy for those people who are manning those desks, you've got a better chance. The only airport I would say I've never had a good experience with film has been Los Angeles. They are not really open to the idea of spending time looking at your film, but everywhere else, like other airports in North America, Australia, and in Europe, were fine.
Yeah, there is a couple of exceptions that keep coming up though. I believe Melbourne in Australia is got a no hand check type policy.
Oh, right.
And so does London, and I'm not sure about Amsterdam. There's a few airports like that which are actually, you have to work hard to get hand scans, and they'll only hand scan anything that's above a certain level of ISO. Yeah.
Well, I will say that there are fewer and fewer benefits to being a U.S. citizen on a weekly basis, it seems. However, if you are a U.S. citizen and you can get global entry, which is a sort of a vetted by TSA certificate, you actually get a little ID card that allows you to skip the standard TSA inspection route. You have your own dedicated line. Last time I flew to Montreal earlier in the spring, at Orlando Airport, the line to go through your standard TSA checkpoint to get to the terminal was about 90 minutes. There were 3 people in line at the TSA line. And so I walked up and I cheerfully said, "Hey guys, I'm a camera photographer or a film photographer, and I've got this bag of film. Would you all mind hand checking it?" And they said, "Oh, yes, sir, of course." And that's been my experience every time I've gone through a TSA checkpoint, that they are less stressed. They are under less time constraints. There's no like interrupting and holding up the line. I mean, if you've got a line that's a 90-minute wait, they're going to be much less likely to be accommodating to hand scanning your film than if you're in the global entry line, and there might be 5-minute wait at tops. So it costs a little bit of money. Most travel credit cards will actually reimburse you for your global entry, and it's my secret weapon for moving around, certainly in and out of the U.S. With film.
So the general belief is it's ISO 800 and up is where you really have to worry about the scanners.
Depends. Some of the new scanners are much more powerful.
Right. That's
and
what I was
much more
going to
likely to fog your film.
Has anybody here had like that actually happen, where their film was ruined by some kind of airport scanner? Has that happened?
No, my one data point, that first of all, I think in Canada we don't have those powerful CT type scanners yet. My one data point was taking a domestic flight in Canada with Fuji Instax film, and I didn't notice anything wrong with the film. It went through, well, no, because then I shot it, so it only went through once, really.
I agree with everything that's been said here. I mean, I've only flown in the United States since I've been shooting film, but I flew back and forth to Los Angeles twice this year. I've taken trips before. When I came back from LA both times, I was by myself, so all I needed was a backpack with my clothes and bathroom stuff in it, but I still had a full size luggage full of cameras. So like I had far fewer clothes than I had this huge suitcase full of cameras. And I was expecting the worst. I got there at the airport every time with, minimum 2 hours, like they always say, but you want to give yourself more time. And, reverse Murphy's Law kicked in, and I prepared as much as I could, and I got through security like a breeze, no issues. My experience has been be as pleasant as possible. Like you all said, have your film, the stuff that you actually do want hand checked in a large, like gallon size Ziploc bag. I read in one of the other groups, someone actually went to the step to take the film actually out of like the cardboard box, and have that individually sitting in the cassette. So to decrease the amount of time if they choose to swab, because they don't always do that. But if they have to swab stuff, then you want to speed up anything they have to disassemble, while you're going through there.
Yeah, I always take the film out of the little plastic tubs, but I do find that they do get a little bit mixed up a little bit when you have the 120 film in the foil. And that's the only time on the trip where I went to Vietnam earlier in the year, where in Singapore they said, "Oh, we quite don't know what to do with this stuff in the foil." And it was low ISO, it was ISO 50, and they weren't using CT scanners, so I just let them put that one through that one time. But it is, you're absolutely spot on there, Mike. You just got to make it as easy as possible and take everything out so they can see what it is, because that's what they're worried about. Is if they can't see what it is, they can't let you on the plane.
When I travel, and I travel fairly extensively for work to Central and South America, I've never had a real issue with the film, but I've had quite an adventure bringing back agricultural samples from places like El Salvador and Honduras, where I had cacao samples and coffee samples from farms where, they might have like nitrate fertilizer and bags around. And boy, do those set off the little swabs. You get very special treatment when your little swab set off the explosive detector. I've had like very, let's just say, precise and exacting inspections of every single thing that I owned.
Good luck getting into Australia like that, Anthony. Like, we have a whole show dedicated to that stuff.
Oh, it was insane. It was insane.
Everything is swabbed.
Are any of you old enough to remember Film Shield bags?
Oh, yeah.
I've seen them.
Film Shield bags were lead-lined bags that SEMA sold, and then they sold them from sizes varying from holding 10 rolls to holding 40 rolls. And they were basically just a bag that had a lead lining. And they were marketed to protect your film against the X-ray. But what would happen is they would X-ray it. They couldn't see through the lead, so they just turned the power up. So they turn it up to the point where you could actually see it glowing inside the machine.
I always wondered about those bags. That I would think that if you were lucky, they'd see an opaque thing. They'd go through it by hand. But it always occurred to me they tend to go back and forth a few times when they're not sure what they're seeing.
Yeah, and they did that. And usually you wind up getting hand inspected anyway. I mean, you get pulled off and they check you out. My last go around with film, when I was traveling extensively to Europe, I was going to London via Toronto. I traveled at that point with Pelican boxes, which are about 5 by 8 inch boxes that are about 4 inches deep. They're deep enough that you can get a roll of 120 film standing on end. And so I would travel with 4 of those. I would have 2 with 120 film and 2 with 35 millimeter. And I carried them on, and I had a bag that I carried them in. I got to Toronto and I went through the inspection, and the guy who inspected me took all of them out of my bag and only put 3 of the 4 back in. And I didn't notice it till I got to London. Actually, I didn't notice it till I got up into Yorkshire. I found that I only had half as much 120 film as I thought I had. So I made doing it. A month later, I get back to Toronto and I go to security, and they had my box.
They held it the whole time?
Yep, they had kept it.
Wow.
I mean, they had not disposed of it. They had just put it in the lost and found. I explained what had happened, and they were very apologetic. I mean, they were very polite about it.
They were Canadian.
Yes.
Yeah, they apologize.
Honestly, I should blame them. If I'd been on my game, I would have paid more attention to what they were putting back in my bag.
If I can follow up, as we were having our host chat before the podcast, Paul was showing us his cameras that he took with him to Ireland in 2017. And it really wasn't a picture of cameras that one would take on vacation, but a picture of Paul's table from the last camera show, where there was no table to be seen for all of the lenses and camera bodies that were on there. And then I showed Paul what I had taken to Ireland the year before, and it was a Minox 35 GTE and a Lumix GF3 with a 12 millimeter Lumix lens. And that was it. When I travel in the United States and I'm sort of car camping, so to speak, I will drag along, a shelf's worth of cameras. I might take the Graflex and might take the G617. But if I'm traveling by backpack someplace, I'm looking for the smallest possible footprint that I can possibly use. So I've got a trip coming up to Japan in November, and I'm totally kind of actually flummoxed now with what I'm going to take, since I've got more cameras to choose from these days. Part of me wants to take a beautiful historic camera like the Zeiss 10X, where it's square format and I get more shots per roll. Part of me is like, oh my God, that camera's 80 years old. Do I really want to travel with that? Thinking about the Voigtländer Zoomar 2, which is probably the smallest 6x6 120 camera that has ever been made. And yet, I don't think I really want to take an SLR or even a DSLR, but maybe something like the Olympus XA4 or one of my Minox or Voigtländer 35 millimeter folders, maybe something shooting 120, and then a wild card camera, which I haven't quite figured out what that third camera would be. But I do think that I'm going to try to do this entire trip. And I've never been to Japan before, so I really don't know like what is great for shooting in that environment. Both that sort of urban environment of Tokyo, but also getting out into the countryside. Want to try to cover all of my bases with 3 cameras.
I went to on a trip to Israel a few years ago. I schlepped a Bronica SQA with 2 lenses, shot a couple of rolls, and I took a Raleigh 35, not the good ones. The what's the one that has the Triatar lens, the 35B, because it was only $15, and I figured if I got sand in it at the beach, who cares? And you guess which one I used? I used the Raleigh. I shot like 3 or 4 36 frame rolls. Everything came out. It never malfunctioned. It was wonderful. I actually regret I ended up selling it and getting a fancy Raleigh 35S with the sonar lens. But because it's more expensive, I baby that one. I don't know if I would take that one on an international trip. The Raleigh 35B was fabulous.
That's my challenge is, I am just paranoid about bringing valuable cameras or stuff that I'm worried I could damage. I have kids, so a lot of times when I'm traveling, there's children involved, and you don't always have the time to be setting up a tripod with a 1/16 folder, where it's manual everything. So finding that right balance is something that you could shoot quickly, easily, doesn't have too high a value, because if something were to break, like you said, Howard, if that 35B got stolen or even just damaged, you'd be a little sad, but you're going to be much more sad if you were to drop an M6 or something like that. So, I that's a struggle for me and I don't even mean like flying internationally. Like sometimes we just go visit family, the next state over. I've learned that if I bring too many cameras, I just don't get to them all. And it stresses me out. Like I actually will get anxiety trying to remember, what do I have? What do I have to shoot? And no matter how much effort I put into labeling which rolls of film are already loaded into which cameras, I almost always forget. It's like, oh crap, that was Neopan 400 and I thought it was Pan X or something like that, or I thought it was color when it was black and white. And I went and got those Avery garage like stickers when you go to a garage sale, the circular, it's like red, green, yellow, blue, and I tried to devise a system color coded. I'd use a Sharpie to write the speed on the sticker and stick it on the back, and it never worked. I just couldn't do it consistently. So I don't have a good solution other than not trying to overcomplicate myself. Yeah, look, Patrick Rapps is like, he's using, is that painter's tape?
Yes.
Yeah,
blue
really
tape.
well.
Yeah, blue tape's great. It all comes down to me as we travel, and we travel for photography. I mean, that's why I travel. I don't travel to go to museums and look at things. I don't travel to I travel to eat because I like to eat, and I travel for photography, and that's the way it's always been. I mean, that's it's over 40 years, probably closer to 50 years I've been doing that. So when I travel, I take the cameras that I want to take and I shoot them. And I take a lot. I mean, we've gone on vacation. Chris took an RB67 with 3 lenses to England one year. I mean, in her carry-on. I mean, it's you make the sacrifice. You figure out what you want to do, where you're going to go, and you take your cameras accordingly. Now, what I do, I bought it wasn't cheap. It was a couple of $100, a bag, a rolling case that fits in an overhead, but it's a 4-wheel spinner. So you set it down, it sits on all 4 wheels. You can push it with one hand. I put the cameras and lenses in that bag, all wrapped up in donkey wrap. It doesn't look like a camera case. It probably weighs, this next trip to England, it's going to weigh probably 30 pounds. But I can get it into the overhead. When I get so old that I can't get a bag into the overhead, then I got to go to plan B. But, it just depends on why you travel. If you're traveling with your family and it's a family event, that's one thing. If you're going just to take pictures and make art, or that's really a stupid thing to say, but if you're traveling to make photographs, then you do what you got to do for that reason.
I have a comment and a question. I'll do the comment first. You talked about the fear of losing cameras. The last time I was in Colombia, I spent a month working on very small, very, very remote coffee farms, and I had taken my Pentax MX with the pancake lens, a Minox B, and a Voigtländer C, which is the Balda made folding Voigtländer. And sure enough, as I was getting ready to leave, I was actually on my phone calling for the Uber to the airport when my bag was stolen. And I lost all 3 cameras and every bit of film that I had shot for that month. And they also got my passport.
Ouch.
So on one hand, the sort of the espionage level thrill of getting out of Colombia and into the United States without a passport sort of kept me from thinking about the camera loss until I was back home. And boy, was that ever an adventure. Try explaining to TSA how you got into the airport in Fort Lauderdale without a passport from Medellin, Colombia. It looks a little dicey. But the camera losses were pretty horrible. I mean, I lost 3 good cameras, but it was losing all of the film that really stung.
Sure.
So anymore, when I travel, I actually keep my camera and my film separate. I just, if there's the possibility that you're a target because you've got your cameras and somebody might have noticed you putting your camera in your bag, don't risk your camera and your film being together. Keep them separate. Certainly if you're in places like where I was in, some of the parts of Medellin where we were, not exactly, tourist areas where, they have a saying there, don't give papaya, don't be flashy to give somebody a reason to try to steal your stuff. And sometimes just simply putting a camera in and out of the bag is giving papaya.
That's a good tip. Keep the film and camera separate.
Yes. So then my question is, as I go to Tokyo and to Japan this next month, I have my Panasonic Lumix camera. I've got my GF3, which I think is like 12 years old, 10 years old. And because I don't shoot that much digital, I haven't really even looked to see what current options are. If you were looking for a compact, either micro four thirds or even just a fixed lens camera that didn't break the bank, that was just sort of like a backup digital camera, does anybody have any recommendations for cameras that they think would make a good travel camera?
I'm all about the little Ricoh GR right now as a pocket camera. It's my daily camera going to and from work. Whenever I go to like parties and stuff like that right now, it's so tiny. It's fits perfectly. I've got just this tiny little satchel under my arm that has the Ricoh GR 3X, the one with the 40 mil. And then I've got my little Rollei 35, the original made in Germany version. And it's just a perfect little pairing for me.
What do you have there, Paul?
That's a Ricoh GR. It's this is one that came from Kurt's collection. This is a limited edition they made, I think, in 2018. The cool thing about it is I'm sold on it. I mean, it's really a great little camera. It has a 28 millimeter fixed lens. It's an APS-C size sensor. So it's a decent size sensor. It is a 28 millimeter fixed lens, but you can stick this on it and it turns it into a 21 millimeter lens. So I'm all about wide angle, so I just leave it on here. I bought the TT Artisan Finders, a 21 and a 28. These things are $43 a piece. Fits on the shoe, so you don't have to be arm's length photography with using the back screen. It's a very cool little viewfinder. But I agree, the GR is just a great little carry camera. And Anthony, this is one I would definitely recommend. Any of the Ricoh GR series are very.
Paul, you're a fan of those Canons, the GX,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
What are those?
Yeah, the what is it? What did we buy? The Gs, the G5s, G6s,
Yeah,
all the way up to the G10s and G11s. Those are great, very durable cameras. They're a little heavier than a lot of them are today, but they're really good quality cameras.
Before I went to LA, I actually bought a Panasonic Lumix LX100. That's a micro four thirds compact point and shoot, 20 megapixel. It's got a Leica branded lens, but what attracted me to it is at the wide angle, it's got a maximum aperture of f1.7, which for a point and shoot is pretty fast. I ended up returning the camera because it was malfunctioning, so I didn't have the best experience with it. But the few times I got it to work, the build quality just seemed incredible. I mean, it felt great in the hands. It has an EVF. I didn't really use it too much because the rear screen was very, very good. So while I didn't have the best experience with that one, I was very impressed with the Lumix LX100. earlier we were talking about just the regular Lumixes. I don't remember all the model numbers. The more rudimentary ones are still very good. Any of the Lumixes with the LX usually have a Leica branded lens. Panasonic did a pretty good job with a lot of those. They have all the features you want. But to answer your question, Anthony, I guess it just depends on whether you want a fixed lens or an interchangeable. Us being the geeks we are, I feel like I tend to keep leaning towards the interchangeables, but they're not as compact. The Lumix is going to fit in a shirt pocket. Even the smallest Sony Alpha or whatever with interchangeable lenses, you mount a Jupiter 8 or something on it, it's not going to fit in your pocket.
But there's actually an argument here for Anthony from what he was sort of going through in terms of what he's thinking about, because you mentioned the Pen F, didn't you, Anthony?
I did.
SLR.
The Pen F would be my DSLR that I would take.
Then something like this, a Micro Four Thirds Lumix. This is the GX7. I think there's a GX8 out. I'm not sure, but I've been using this for years, and this is fantastic. It actually, with the adapter, you can put the Pen F lenses on it, so then you get the dual purpose of being able to use your wonderful Pen F, and then when you feel like a bit of digital, sticking those same top quality lenses onto the actual digital camera.
My GF3 is a Micro Four Thirds, but the only adapter I have is an Exacta, a Micro Four Thirds, and I use the big honkin' Biogon from the Exacta Varix that I have on it, because it's like a fairly wide lens, and
Yeah.
Do you need Micro Four Thirds adapters, Anthony?
I might.
I have 3 whole boxes of them.
And Paul's pulled out a whole bunch of them.
Please, if anyone needs any Pen F to Micro Four Thirds adapters, see me.
From an argument point of view, in terms of being able to multi-use, that's actually not an idea to consider.
That is actually.
Well, and I'll say just to point this out, the original film Pen F, those lenses were designed to cover an 18 by 24 millimeter frame, and that is almost exactly the size of APS-C. There's almost no crop. I mean, there might be like a tiny crop factor, but it's damn near insignificant. Your coverage is perfect. Plus, those old Pen F film lenses were just razor sharp. They are very ideal to be adapted to modern digital. So for someone looking for like both digital and film, the Pen F, I would 100% agree, is not only a great film camera to have, but those lenses adapt very well.
And also, if you're concerned a little bit with the Micro Four Thirds in terms of low light, I mean, it does have a bit of a bad rap that way. The new you use Lightroom, don't you, Anthony? Yeah, that's the new AI noise reduction feature. I can tell you what, it is absolutely amazing. I used it on photos from Vietnam in the markets at night, and you couldn't tell the difference whether you used a full frame or not. It is just amazing.
I fell victim to, Micro Four Thirds is even smaller than APS-C. It must be bad. And I never even considered trying them, but another Kurt camera I have is this monster. This is an Olympus OMD. It's called the EM1X. It's freaking huge. And this is a Micro Four Thirds camera. And I've been playing with it a little bit. And like you just said, Theo, I've taken some pictures with it. It shoots raw. I've pulled it into Adobe Photoshop CC, and the images look, maybe if I pixel peeped, maybe, but just at full screen on my computer monitor, between the Z5 and this thing, they're both very, very good. I was impressed.
Paul, is that an Olympus Pen Digital?
It is. This is the Pen Lite, the EPL5, which is tiny, but it's got the finder on it. And this is interesting. This has the fisheye lens, which is, you can see how small it is, but it's actually a fisheye. It has its 3 focus ranges on it, but it's unbelievably sharp. They're dirt cheap, but I just leave this particular lens on this camera. If
anybody here needs the EVF for one of those Olympus cameras, I have like 5 of them. They just clip in on the top. There's a little port, and then they slide into the hot shoe. Yeah, I have like 5 of them.
That's, we'll talk about this. It's amazing how many things that we're finding that there were duplicates on, or quadruplicates, or or 20 of, it just boggles your mind to try to figure out why.
Well, I don't mean to get off topic, but it's something I literally found today. I found this in a bag with lens caps. I saw this little thing and I thought it was a lens cap, but it's actually a columinitor. So this is from like a Minox, like a 35 ml or GT. Somebody hacked the lens off one of those tiny little, like where the front like door folds down, those little tiny Minoxes.
DAG does that. Yeah, it's a DAG.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
So it's got an M39 screw mount on the back of it.
Yep. That's a Dan Goodman hack.
Oh, well, I didn't know that. Well, I have one.
That's very nice.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, so we've spent a ton of time on travel cameras. I don't want to cut anybody short. Looks like we already lost somebody. Maxwell, did you have anything you wanted to contribute? Any tips or tricks that you found?
I would love to contribute a story here because I think I have found the greatest travel camera of all time, and I will not be taking any corrections. I went to New York City this last February, and I brought a Yashica Electro 35, the GSN, and I very quickly realized that I really wasn't a fan of it. I wasn't a fan of using it, and I didn't really realize that until I got into the nitty-gritty of it. So I ended up selling it at a camera store and getting a Raleigh 35. I wasn't really a fan of zone focusing, but the other day at the camera show in Cincinnati, I bought from our very own Paul Reibold Minox B, and this thing has made some incredible photographs. I am so over the moon with it. I've been putting 400 speed color film in it, and it's beautiful. I've been meaning to put some in the Facebook group. I think I've spammed the Minox groups enough that I don't think they want to hear from me anymore.
No, you posted some on Facebook. I saw the picture that you shot.
Yeah, I think some of them are in some of the subminiature groups, but for a travel camera, the only thing that worries me is if I was to bring it through an airport, most people know what 35 millimeter film looks like, but if I show them a Minox cartridge, what are they going to think? So if anybody's traveled with Minox recently, I'd love to hear.
I take a Minox B or C with me wherever I go. Like anytime I like leave the county, I've got a Minox with me. So I've traveled around the world with them and never had an issue.
So I'll ask the newbie question. How do you get film for that, and how do you process the film?
I will buy the cartridges, and then I'd recommend this for anybody who shoots film as a whole. Find a friend who has a 3D printer, because I had this guy 3D print me a little slitter, and I would go grab it, but I'm a little lazy, that slits a roll of 35 millimeter down to two 9.2 millimeter strips, and then all of the cartridges are reloadable by default. So it's incredibly easy to do. And then I've got a 3D printed reel I use, and it's a breeze. I've got a DSLR scanning setup over here. It's Pixelator is the company that makes it, and it's able to do Minox by default. So I have a bunch of extension tubes and a micro Nikkor 55 millimeter, and I've gotten some beautiful pictures out of it.
I agree. I have a slitter that takes 120 and slits it into 4. So you get 8 rolls of film out of one roll of 120, and so that's pretty darn economical. If you buy like the FOMO 100, where it's like $5 a roll, now you're talking about pennies per roll of Minox film. You reload the cartridges, and then I've got one of the original Art Deco Bakelite Minox developing tanks, which are a work of art in themselves, where it's got this like tank that where it's got a screw top that you screw it down and it pulls the film out of the cartridge and holds it in a channel. Then it uses a 1/4 cup of developer, so it's incredibly economic. And then I scan with my Epson V700 and a couple of pieces of Newtonian glass. It makes it's cheaper than shooting 35 millimeter when you set up like that. You're literally talking about maybe 65 cents a roll for the film, and then developing it's pennies. And
for economy, nothing beats it.
Now, if you're buying from Blue Moon and having them develop it, you're looking at like $35 a roll. So it isn't economical. But if you can do it yourself, it's just like it's a true hobbyist film, and it's a blast to work with.
Yeah, it's a camera that you can take anywhere.
Mark Faulkner's on, and Mark, you made me a 3D slitter that was adjustable, but I don't think it did Minox size, did it?
It didn't. It's a fairly simple thing to adjust in the file to print it out, but that could be done, easily be done for sure.
Between 3D printed slitters that there's a bunch of options, whether you know someone like Maxwell suggested who could print one for you. I see a bunch of them on eBay. People are starting to sell them. A hack that I first learned from Adam Paul, but I've actually run into other people who've done this too, where he actually adapted a broken TLR to slice 120. So he basically created a little plate and measured out where to put the razor blade and put the razor blade in the film plane. And then he would just load the film in the camera and just advance it from start to finish. And as the film is transporting through the TLR, it's slicing it. So I'm not saying that that's the best way to do it. That's just what he did, before. And we're talking about, 6, 7, 8 years ago. 3D printing options are a lot better now than they used to be. But people have come up with many different clever ways of cutting film down, whether it's a real simple 120 to 127, whether you're looking to cut down some 828 film, like let's say for a Bantam, or you're looking for 16 millimeter Minox film. There's a ton of options out there, which is really awesome to see.
There is one really fantastic travel camera for medium format, and it's the best camera in the world. I have to jump in and say it's yeah, we know what's coming here.
We already established it's the Karat 2.
No, it's the Mamiya 7. Come on.
It's the Mamiya 6. How about the Mamiya 6?
That's close. But the Mamiya 7, interesting enough, the Mamiya 6 is actually a really good option because it does, the lenses do actually sort of have to sort of click in and out, don't they? They sort of compact themselves. The Mamiya 7, they don't. So I have to give you that the Mamiya 6 is actually a forerunner. But for quality-wise, it's the Mamiya 7. I mean, seriously, a rangefinder, you got the best lenses in the world. It's compact, it's light. It just ticks all the boxes for pretty much any occasion.
Is that really better than the Fuji 617?
I will veto that as a travel camera. Although if you could hike to the top of a mountain or something and get some panoramics with the ultimate panoramic camera, that would be cool. But I think the amount of effort it would require to get it there would be insurmountable, in my opinion.
I mean, to be fair, I was thinking about bringing the medalist to Chicago this weekend. We'll see if that happens.
Yeah, that's right. Mark's coming to visit me this weekend. I'm going to be hitting up the I forget what they call it, Photorama. I don't know. It's whatever the Chicago version of the show that Paul goes to. It's in Elk Grove Village, which is a northwest suburb of Chicago. Bob Rodoloni is going to be there. I'm sure Vlad Kern's going to be there. If we're lucky, maybe Johnny Sisson will show up. I'm sure Hong Lee will be there. But we're going to be there and see if we could see any people. But if you bring your medalists, that'd be cool.
I hear that there are a few camera shops in Tokyo. So I actually thought about flying over without a camera and then having to buy a camera there, whether it was going to be a wide lux or something that I just can't find readily in the States. And that would be my choice of what to shoot in Tokyo. But then again, I saw somebody that was like taking bags of Argus C3s over to trade because apparently they aren't very common in Tokyo and you can get some trade value in them. So, maybe I could take some Signets, maybe a couple of Argus, some US made cameras over there. And, sort of like that thing of you start with the toothpick and end up with a house. Maybe I can start with an Argus C3 and end up with a Leica.
With a Mamiya 7, clearly.
Anthony, Marcy Merrill, she's been on the show a couple times. She's runs Junk Store Cameras. She's actually in Japan right now. I've seen a few pictures she's posted at the Imperial Palace, at the gates and stuff like that. So after this show, shoot her a message and see if she has any recommendations on shops to visit.
Oh, cool. Yes, I will.
Yeah.
Another option for traveling, which is nice and compact. It's 35 millimeter. I think everybody loves actually shooting with this. A bit of a weird one, but it's like it. Yeah, you could consider taking a Kodak Retina, but this is the Zeiss Icon Contessa, and I'm getting thumbs up from Anthony. Folds up into a nice little compact. This is actually a Paul Rybold purchase. Beautiful little camera to use. It's compact. So if if you want something for 35 millimeter, Anthony, and it's nice and compact, and it becomes like a secondary option, that's not a bad option either.
Actually, Theo, I think Anthony has the companion to that one.
I do.
I had two of them. You got one, and he got the other one.
And the other camera that the last time I was in New York City, my primary camera was the Voigtländer Vito 3, which is the folder that's based on the Prominent that also has the Ultron lens. It's also a really nice rangefinder camera. But yeah, the Contessa is on my short list. The Contessa, the Vito 3 is on the short list. Still want to take the 10X, but don't know if I want to risk it. But no, I think the Contessa is a beautiful camera. It's good. It's a good idea. It'd certainly get attention. And then of course I've got each of the Super Icontas from the 645 up to the big one. And I had thought about taking the 645 or the 6x6 because they're both among my favorite cameras.
In terms of the Contessa, while I know they make great images, everybody always says, well, they're kind of like a Kodak Retina. But I guess for me, I'd rather just have a Kodak Retina. I've never been fond of the Contessa's control layout. The shutter release and the cocking lever are just like jammed in there in that tiny little space. To turn the shutter speeds, you have to like grip. There's only one spot where you can grip it. It's a good camera. They make wonderful images. The build quality is very high, Zeiss quality. But I just feel like the Contessa 35 has too many compromises that the Retina does not have. So you're not going to sell me on that one. I'll buy the Mamiya 7, Theo, because I'm sure it's a great camera. But I would not bring a Contessa 35.
Fair point.
Real quick, Miles had recommended flashback camera in Tokyo. If you find the time, and Mina was agreeing with Patrick on the Zeiss Iconta series.
And a Werra.
Oh, a Werra, yeah. Now those are great cameras, but I've never found one that's not stiff that hurts your fingers. Is it? Really good. Anthony, you loaned me yours, and it ripped the skin off your fingers. In fact, I got to the end of the roll, and he had recommended to me, don't try to rewind the film because it's so tight. Like, just shoot the roll and then go into a dark room and open up the camera and just rewind the film by hand, because his was really stiff. And I've since gotten 2 more, and they were kind of the same way.
Yeah, I have the Werra 1, and the rewind has just got this like knurled aluminum disc that you have to spin, and it'll just rip right through your fingers as you get about halfway through the roll and the tension starts picking up on it. And it's really, really just that. Because I love the camera otherwise.
It changed,
oh, look at that. They put a handle on it.
Around the Werra 3 onwards, this changed.
What I do love about those cameras, the viewfinder is excellent on. When they're clean, amazing. That is, it's amazing. Yeah. Very, very nice viewfinder.
Yeah. The Werra-Matic has that Judas window as well. So it gives you, so you're about to say that, weren't you, Mark?
Yep.
Nikon style, like, tells you what settings are set down. Yeah.
Yeah, I love those. I love the Werra. Any of the Werras. I've never really had any problems with the stiffness, though. Maybe I've been lucky, but yeah.
Yeah, I've had 3, and they've all been, 2 of my own plus Anthony's is the third one. They were all I mean, don't get me wrong, any camera can be stiff, but
if you get the ones that have the circular back ones, they have an inbuilt diopter. The older ones, they were just a single sort of reverse Galilean. But I think they're really, really nifty cameras.
Yeah,
they are fantastic.
And a fun fact about those is a lot of people incorrectly call them a Zeiss Icon, and they are not. They're actually made in Jena, at Carl Zeiss Jena. Actually made that camera. That's the only camera that they actually made in any large quantities. I guess the story goes is after the Soviet Union kind of came in and took over East Germany, they assigned all the lens making to be out of Jena, but there were all these engineers that had nothing to do. So they just decided to create their own camera with very little guidance from the East German government, and that's what they came up with. So if the proper name for the Werra is Carl Zeiss Jena Werra, it is not a Zeiss Icon product.
I bought this little book that's only in German, so it took me ages to try and sort of translate it using Google Translate. But echoing what you were saying, it's the only camera that's branded Carl Zeiss. So it's the only one that's got the Carl Zeiss stamp on it.
Correct.
And the other thing is, because of the Synchro Compor licensing problem between East and West, those same engineers had to come up with a shutter that could go to 500 and above, not using the Synchro Compor style. So the Prestor was born, and it's the only one. I think it's similar to what Minolta did with the double shutter, the double capping, but this actually does get above 500th without reducing the available apertures for you. It actually does get there because it doesn't have to open and close in the one cycle.
Kodak did the same thing
really cool.
with the Chevron and the high-end Tourist that use the exact same concept where a normal leaf. So what he's talking about is a leaf shutter. Hopefully you've seen what a leaf shutter looks like. The blades have to open one direction, stop, and then make a complete opposite turn to close. So like think of a windshield wiper, one motion, and then it has to go the other way. But with what he's talking about, the shutter blades spin in a 360-degree circle. And when they're spinning, that's when they open. But there's a second, like a capping shutter that has twin blades. So if you have the high-end Tourist or a Chevron or one of these cameras, you'll notice that if you look at the shutter from one direction, there's two blades. If you look at the shutter from the other direction, there's the typical 5 or whatever there is. So that the actual shutter speed itself is dictated by how fast the blades can spin in a complete circle. They don't have to stop, reverse direction, and go back the other direction. So you're able to achieve a faster shutter speed without doing what Minolta did and only have it work at small apertures.
I will say that if you've not played with one of these Werra cameras before, when you see them, the first thing that almost anybody says is, my God, this could have been an Apple design 50 years before Apple was in existence, as far as like an industrial design that drew from like the best of Bauhaus, the best of mid-century modern sort of minimalist functionalism. It is such a cool camera. There's something very pleasurable about, even though it does feel a little bit aluminum, a little bit tinny. You have to get used to using a ring around the shutter. I mean, around the lens to advance and cock the film, advance the film, cock the shutter. Excuse me. But they're just really cool designs.
And it's just to prove what you just said. You know, I just came across this camera today. This is called the Minolta V3. More people have seen the V2, which has a top 1/2000th shutter speed, but the V3 goes to 1/3000th, and it's a leaf shutter. The only way it's able to do that is by only opening at the smallest possible aperture, though. So,
Mike, I recently got this Fujica 35EE that goes to 1/1000th, and I haven't heard anything about their shutter being any kind of wonky half opening double. Like, do you know anything about the shutter story for that?
I think that's a Citizen shutter. That definitely does not have any compromises. All they did was just boost the tension of the spring.
Okay.
Don't hold me to this, but I believe the blades are made out of plastic or some incredibly lightweight material. So they were able to give it, it's like Spinal Tap, you know, the amps don't go to 10, they go to 11. Yeah. It goes to 11. So yeah, there are a small number of cameras. Fujica did a couple of them. I think even Yashica for a short while did have a leaf shutter that did to 1/1000th. But what they did was they just pushed the limits of what the blades could move. Whereas Minolta was big with the Uniomat, the V2, the V3, where what they did was as you go to the highest speeds, if you actually watch the shutter blades, they're physically rotating as you're cocking the shutter. So they're still actually opening and closing at the same top speed, but because they're moved, it's really hard to describe without showing it. The gist is that you can only get small apertures at those fast speeds. Really, that's when you need it, though. You know, you're trying to freeze motion in bright sunlight. You're probably stopping down your lens anyway, but you just need a little bit of extra speed. So it's probably not a huge compromise. But the fact that very few people ever did it, you know, proves that it really wasn't as necessary as maybe it probably sounds.
But even in saying that, I think in some cases brands like Polaroid leveraged it on purpose. So I was listening to the instant camera guy, who's a local technician, sort of self-taught technician for SX70s. I'm going to butcher this description, but Polaroid, because of the way that the SX70 was built, couldn't put the shutter to move up and down as fast as a typical SLR. So they leveraged that relationship between closing down the aperture and changing the way the blades moved and the shape of the blades to emulate having a faster shutter speed, even though it's not realistically any faster when you measure it mechanically.
There are a few cameras with like a combined aperture shutter where it's just the shutter blades don't open all the way to get the small apertures. And
wasn't the Olympus pen like that? The pen EEs were like that. They just opened at a different size. That way you didn't have or the Sure shots. There's a series of cameras that do that.
Yeah, there actually were a decent number of them, but for the life of me, I can't recall which ones do that. But it could be the Shinons, maybe some of the pens. But yes, that was another way to do it too. And usually you'll see that on less expensive cameras. What they're trying to do is eke out whatever performance they can with a simpler design. So I think we talked quite a bit about travel cameras, really great airport tips, be friendly, mark things, make it as easy as possible. It's difficult to travel with too many cameras at once. My tip was I can't deal with too valuable of a camera or something overly complicated because, while you're traveling, you no matter how much you think you're on your game, you're going to mess up. You're going to forget something, whether it's what film is loaded or how to shoot something or maybe break something. But we've had a lot of demand, from people asking us to talk about different topics. I had a guy say we should talk more about shutters, and I'm not anti-shutter, but I just don't know what I could really talk about to any extent there. We were joking about 110 cameras. Anthony, weren't you saying a little earlier that Rudy convinced you to pick up a couple 110 cameras?
He did. I've picked up a whole bunch of 110 film from him, and then two somewhat unique Fuji 110 cameras. One with this kind of wacky flash tower on it, and the other one with the big focusable lens.
Yeah, I have one of those too. And then there's the Minolta SLRs, the 110. There was like the Mark 1 and Mark 2. Of course, everybody knows about the Asahi Pentax 110. And I think, you get the right kind. And, Maxwell, you mentioned the Minox. You can get really good results out of the right compact camera. I think you really got to choose your film stock wisely. Fine grain films are going to do much better. I would probably not pick like a 3200 speed, super grainy film and try and run it through a tiny camera like that. Maybe more like a microfilm, which has little to no grain, would probably be good for that. Expired color probably isn't the best to go through those tiny little cameras, but what kind of film did he give you?
Everything.
Okay. Probably just wanted to get
I'm overwhelmed with 110 film.
Yeah. I'll admit I reviewed a couple 110 cameras. I did the Canon 110 ED, which has a fast f2 lens. It's got a rangefinder. It's an optical rangefinder, just like a 35 millimeter will. It's got multiple shutter speeds. I have the ED, which has the date back. It can even imprint a date on the film. And I as much as I tried, I couldn't, I don't know. I couldn't get along with it. I did not enjoy the results.
I gotta tell you, my favorite 110 that I've shot is the Minox 110. It's got these like crazy barn doors, sort of like the Shannon Bellamy that open up, and it has an optical rangefinder in it and a fairly sophisticated auto aperture priority system. And I've gotten the best results from it. It was honestly, most people would think they were 35 millimeter shots if I were to show them the scans. But they're fairly hard to come by.
Now, what lens is on those Minox 110s? Is it like a Minotaur, like on the 35s?
Yeah.
And you had a lot more success with those than the Rollies.
Oh, and the Rollies, I'm like 0 for 5 on the Rollie 110s. They just the advanced system on that just does, whether it's the lube that's gumming up on it or the just bad plastic gears that are in it. I've yet to find a Rollie 110. I had 5 new in the box that I was testing for a collector, and not a single one. I think I got 4 frames between the 5 cameras. It just was not very satisfactory. But the Voigtländer 110 is actually an excellent camera.
The Vitorette.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's I was just about to ask you about that one.
It's more reliable and is also very high quality. It's a zone focus as opposed to being a rangefinder camera. But for a 110 camera, that's probably my favorite all around 110.
What was it actually like by then? Voigtländer had really ceased to be though by then. What was it actually?
They were owned by Rolleiflex at that time. Okay. And I believe I've heard 2 stories. I've heard one is that they were produced by Balda, and another that they were produced by everybody's favorite
King.
Yeah, King Regula.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of Balda because there was a little 35 compact that they branded.
Yeah, the Vito C.
Yeah. Okay.
What year, Anthony, was that made?
This is late. It's late in the 110 cycle. Hold on, I can tell you.
Voigtländer was owned by Zeiss from like 63, 64 until 72. And that's when they were moved under Rollie. So I think they kept, it probably was mid 70s, if you might guess.
Yeah, I've seen a story where King made that. It was
1979.
Yeah, all right. That's definitely in the Rolly era. Yeah, Voigtländer is one brand that's been, even though it's, technically the oldest German optics brand. I mean, they have a corporate history that can go back to the 1700s. The Voigtländer name has bounced around so many times. There's the Cosina, the Bessas from the 2000s, which Cosina didn't even own the Voigtländer brand. It was owned by, I think, like Photo Quell or somebody. It was some German retailer owned it, or their parent company did. And then Cosina just licensed the name for the Bessa rangefinders. And, who knows who owns it today, but I'm sure somebody does. One day we'll probably see an interchangeable film back digital camera with the Voigtländer name. I wouldn't be surprised.
I'm not even a big rangefinder fan, but I have a Vitessa and I have a Vitomatic too. And I feel, and I have some of their SLRs from the 50s, the leaf shutter SLRs. I didn't want to have so many, but I had to go through about 4 to get a couple that worked. But the fit and finish on Voigtländers from the 50s is, I mean, I've never owned a Leica, but I think it's probably as good as any German camera ever has been. They're just...
That Bessamatic is a beast. It's really, really, it's a tank. It's absolutely well made.
Yeah.
I have a show and tell. I'll have pictures of this. So I have a nice leather case here. You probably can't see it, but it's embossed with Voigtländer. But we'll look, you can see the back of it. So you could probably figure out it's a Bessamatic. But what kind of lens would be mounted to a Bessamatic?
It's got a Zoomar.
Zoomar.
I was never that attracted to the Zoomar, I guess, because the primes are also very nice and, smaller.
The primes are great, but this thing is just, if you don't ever pick one up, Howard. Like if you see one, just run away. Because the second you touch it, you're like, I need to own this. It's
okay.
It's got a push to pull zoom. It's basically like a 2x zoom. I mean, it doesn't do much, but it's a consistent f2.8, across the range. I mean, this thing is heavy. This is a solid chunk of metal and glass. It's a lot of fun, man. There's just something about putting this thing to your eye. Anthony loves the Bessamatic. I'm a huge fan of these. I agree with you. The fit and finish is fantastic. It's as high as, in my opinion, any German camera maker was in the 50s. I don't know if this is true or if it's just I got lucky. I mentioned earlier I've never had a Werra that wasn't stiff. Well, I've had a lot of really good luck with Bessamatics. The leaf shutters almost always work on these. I don't know if that they did anything different. Maybe they used a different kind of lube. Like Topcon leaf shutter SLRs almost never work, whereas the Bessamatics, I've had really good luck with them. And I even have the Ultramatic, which was their higher end version. And I don't like that camera nearly as much as the Bessamatic. In fact, I would even go as far as to say the Bessamatic is the best leaf shutter SLR I've ever shot.
I agree. Now, I will say, Mike, you compared to your Zoomar, though, my Super Dynarex 350 5.6 makes that look like a pancake lens.
Is that the one with a 90-foot minimum focus distance?
Absolutely. The minimum focal distance on it is 90 feet, and it can still do fine focus at a mile.
Jesus Christ.
Is that a mirror lens, Mark? Or what is that?
What is that, Mark?
This is a Russian lens made in the USSR. It's like I forget how many.
Is it the Rubin?
Let's see here. It's the MTO 1000A.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the mirror lens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that your travel lens, Mark?
Yeah, I was going to say, this is exactly what I take when I go on trips, just get an adapter, set it up with the Olympus pen, and it's a great combination.
He doesn't need to leave the hotel room. He can just get the sights in by sitting
exactly.
in the
Exactly.
Well, I always thought the Super Dynarex lens was actually designed to go on a tripod to take photos across the Berlin Wall. Because it's that minimum 90-foot focal distance. You're shooting across the wall. It doesn't matter. You don't need to shoot stuff that's on your side of the wall. You're shooting the other side of the wall.
Mike, you and Rudy sent me 3 of the Russian copies of that Zoomar lens.
Oh, did we? The Rubins?
Yes. There were 3 of them. 2 of them worked. Or no, 1 of them worked. 2 of them were, shall we say, parts lenses.
I have one that Vlad Kern actually sourced from me. He had a buyer in Russia that was so the Rubin 1 is even though people say it's a copy of the Zoomar, it is not. It has a different focal length. It does not have the push to zoom. It is similar. And because the Bessamatic uses the DKL mount, the decal mount, which is similar to what like the Kodak Retina Reflex has, the Zoomars typically came with the DKL mount. They also came with the Exacta mount, and I think you could get them in the M42, but that's really, really rare. But of the Soviet version, that Rubin-1 only came on a camera called the Zenit 6. The Zenit 6, the Zenit 4, 5, and 6. The bodies are fairly similar. The 5 had a motor drive. The 4 and 6 were basically the same, but the only difference was with the 6, you got the Rubin lens. So it had the Russian version of the DKL mount. And Vlad had found a seller who was taking those lenses and readapting them back to M42 mount. So I bought one. He actually got it shipped to me from Russia. This is a couple years ago. And I mounted it to a Zenit. And I mean, it actually performed really good. Like it was cool shooting like a mid-century zoom lens. You know, we take zoom lenses for granted, and the math to create the glass to decide the optics for a zoom lens is really difficult. And, you know, we could do that today with the aid of computers, but, you know, back then when people were doing everything on pencil and paper with, you know, slide rules and, you know, straight up hardcore math, to come up with the designs to build this stuff was just really, really hard. So that's why you didn't really see too many zoom lenses until, you know, really the 60s or the 70s is when they actually started to get good. But the Zoomar, and to a little bit lesser degree, the Rubin-1, you know, actually have a pretty good reputation. But when I come back to Mark's MTO, he has the 1000 millimeter. That's a mirror lens. The proper name for that is cat-eye dioptic. And what's interesting is, you know, we always think of the Germans and the Japanese as being these innovators in making lenses, but the first person to actually come up with the idea of a mirror lens was actually a Russian named Maksutov. Dmitry, Matsukov. So a lot of people, he was actually making it for telescopes, but they were able to adapt that to a still photography lens. The MTO was one of the earlier designs for it, and they're really quite good. For a while there, Spiratone was importing them in the United States, and they didn't hide that they were Russian lenses. If you get an opportunity to pick up one of the MTO lenses, whether it's the 500 like I have or the 1000 that Mark has, the optics on them are excellent. Like Vivitar made a couple mirror lenses, you know, obviously Nikon did too, but they're prohibitively expensive. But if you could find one of the 500 or 1000 MTO lenses and you're interested in mirror lenses, that's actually a great lens to try out because the optics on them are quite good. And you can get that donut bokeh that some people go crazy for, that those lenses are famous for.
Let's make sure you get a really strong tripod, however. I've had a couple of near major mishaps trying to use this thing.
Now, does yours have the set of filters? Did it come with the filters?
It did not, unfortunately. No, I would love to get my hands on that. Yeah.
Yeah. If a tip, if you're looking to get one of those lenses, try to find one in the original case. It's really easy to find because it's a big wooden box. And if you could get one of the MTO, either the 500 or 1000, it should come with a set of filters, but they're really cool.
Yeah, if you want a more budget version, I got given a 500 mirror lens Pentax K-mount. This thing is phenomenal. I stick it onto my Micro Four Thirds if I'm not using it on a Pentax camera. And when the moon is like full moon and you've got, you know, the super moon coming through, I can see I've got a picture. Howard's got that picture right behind him at the moment, actually.
That's through an 800 millimeter Meade telescope, by the way, which I just got. So
on a Micro Four Thirds, that 500 becomes 1000, and it's just superb in terms of, you know, what you can actually reach with it. Granted, it's not like the same quality as the Nikon or one of those, but it's a good budget version.
I was just going to ask about. There's a Nikon 500 millimeter reflex. I think it's f8. And I often see a Tamron, I think it's f8, or there might be two different aperture versions. And they're all not very expensive. Even the Nikon branded one is not that expensive. I wonder what they're like.
There's an f8, which is probably affordable, but there's an f5.6 that I promise you is not.
Yeah,
okay.
I had a 5.6 from Kurt.
That's an expensive one.
Yeah, they were a little more, but you know, as far as mirror lenses, when you go find a used one, generally speaking, they're in mint condition because no one ever used it.
Right.
They're one of those things that everyone thinks they need to have one, and they'll go out and take a picture of the moon or something, and then they never use them again. The best, though, that I've ever found were the 3 different Vivitar Series 1s. There was a 400, a 500, and a 600, and they were called solid cats, and they were excellent lenses. They were the fit and finish, and the optic was very good on them. Of course, I mean, optically, a mirror lens is nothing but a set of mirrors.
Right.
So there isn't much in the way of optics.
No, it's like they're usually like 3 elements. It's like 3 pieces of glass and a mirror.
The solid cats were the absolute best as far as the quality of the lens.
Another thing about mirror lenses that I found interesting, they all focus beyond infinity. And while that seems like a defect, that's actually by design, because they're so precise in terms of precision, the different mounts, because usually those lenses were made for a multitude of mounts. And I also heard that they're one kind of lens that's affected by temperature. If you try to shoot them in the warmth or in the cold, that actually can throw off the focus accuracy. So they intentionally design them that they'll focus beyond infinity. And so you can't get spoiled, point the thing at the moon, turn the focus ring as far as it'll go. You will not get sharp pictures.
Yeah, they do what they call focus breathing, and they will change as depending on the atmospheric conditions and the temperature.
I did not know that. That's very interesting. My question was actually along the lines of focusing as well. I noticed the Pentax one at least has a macro. It calls itself a macro lens as well, and I can't for the life of me work out why you would want a 500 millimeter mirror lens to try and do macro work.
Because it reduces the minimum focus distance from like 50 feet down to like 20.
That's probably photographing those dangerous murder hornets, right?
Well, it lets you isolate the background.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're doing a flower that you just absolutely don't want anything but just with one tiny bit of the plant in focus. It lets you isolate it, because I mean, you got an f8, so you got very little. I mean, your depth of field is what it is. You're not going to get any more.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When I go up to Manning Park, there's the Alpine Meadows, and you're not allowed to venture off the path, because if you step off the path and step onto a flower, it literally takes 20 years for that flower to regrow because of the altitude. So you have to use a long lens with an extension tube or a mirror lens with that close focus capability in order to photograph things a little bit closer.
And here's a tip for you. The one to look for, if you ever see one in a thrift shop, be sure to buy it. It's the Minolta Rokkor 250 millimeter f5.6 mirror. They are tiny. I think they were $219 or something new, because they couldn't sell them, and now they're up into $700 and $800, and you can't find them.
It's funny how certain lenses over the years that were once value lenses have gone the complete opposite direction. And it's like the standard prism for the Nikon F used to be throwaway devices, and now people pay a premium for them because there's so few of them. So I would suspect, Paul, back then a 250 millimeter mirror lens was very low demand.
Yeah, but it was. I mean, it wasn't. What was the point? I mean, it was a 5.6. You could get a 200 f4 that would have been much more useful.
Yeah. Since we're talking about some kind of strange lenses and interesting lens designs, a lens that I got, actually Paul had to send it to me. It's a one of a kind Minolta. It's called the Rokkor-X. It's a 40 to 80 millimeters, so it's a 2x zoom. It's a solid f2.8 design. Some people call this the gearbox lens. So it's a typical looking zoom made in the 70s, but it has a box that protrudes out the side with a dial on the side. And the dial is used to change the focus. And then in the center of the dial is a lever, which changes the zoom. I don't have it mounted to a camera, but if you have it mounted to a camera, you're holding it on the side, turning it. And there's no barrel like a typical lens where you focus it on the barrel. It's a gearbox on the side of the lens that allows it to individually move. And I did a little bit of research on this lens. I do plan on writing a review of it and try to get a little more technical detail on it if I could find more information. But Minolta kind of had to think outside the box when designing this lens, because back then, the technology to create good zooms wasn't what it is now. And most early zooms had what do they call it, varifocal, where the as you zoom, the focus changes. So like you could be at the wide angle, focus precisely on your subject, but if you zoom, you're no longer in focus. And that's a lesser design that's just easier to construct. So Minolta was trying to figure out the best way to avoid that and come up with a fixed aperture where it's f2.8 at both the narrow and the wide. And that was the result of it. It's a great lens. Actually, it works really well. It makes really good images. I've played with it a little bit, but it's such a quirky design that no one else did it. And even Minolta, that was the only time they had a lens that was like that. But I love the history, whether it's the Zoomars, the Rubins, the MTO mirror lenses, this thing, just all the things we take for granted, these Chinese lenses that are coming out, like 24 millimeter f1.4 lenses. It used to be the Canon Dream lens, the 0.95 was like crazy. Like nobody made a lens that fast. Or very few people did. Now you could just go on Amazon and order a TT Artisans f0.95 lens. What we're able to do now with computers and recreating optical formulas that would have been fantasy back in the 60s and 70s is just really impressive. So we're at a good point in the show. We've covered a wide variety of topics. Like always, we never really know which direction we're going to go into. I would have never expected us to talk about mirror lenses or strange focal lengths and stuff like that. Does anybody here have anything new, any new gas they've picked up or anything they want to share real quick? Or
before we get to that, what would you think if we just sort of spitballed, since this is the first episode of our new season, maybe spitball some ideas for shows that people would like to see? Because I know that there was some chatter about that in the meeting chat off to the side. Maybe we can drum up some support here and then get feedback either on the Facebook or the Instagram groups to see what people are interested in hearing about from this year. I know that I wholeheartedly endorse the idea that we do a show that focuses on Yashica and Contax SLRs. I don't think we've really done anything about them yet.
We haven't. And honest to God, Yashica's the brand I've been chomping at the bit to do. The problem I'm having is I know 3 people that I think would be perfect, like they have a lot of background knowledge on them, and none of them are willing or able to do it. So I'm not saying we have to have an expert, because we've certainly winged it on many of these shows before, but I do like it when we had, Ray on, talked about Mamiya, having someone that could throw a little bit more context, and tell us some of the stories we don't know, I think makes those shows great. But I'm with you. I definitely want to do a Yashica show. On the surface, you think, oh yeah, okay, they made a couple TLRs, they made the Electro, but Yashica was like the dominant TLR maker in Japan. I mean, they, everybody thinks of like the Ricoh Diacord and the Minolta Autocords, and they were great cameras, but Yashica was outselling them like 3-1.
That was my other idea, was that we've never done a dedicated TLR show.
No, we haven't. We really haven't talked about Rolleiflex.
I think that would be another good topic to consider.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I'd be curious to hear what the rest of our guests would like to see for the rest of the year.
I second the TLR show.
Well, I wrote in the chat, I'm interested in Fuji, not just the cameras, but the corporation and how did they distribute in America. I don't know much about that story, but Paul wrote that you may actually be able to get an expert in that. And so that would be a good future topic.
I agree.
How about a sub-mini episode? That's kind of what I'm really would be looking forward to.
I think that's a great idea too. I know Bob Rodoloni. He's been on the show many, many, many times. He's
Mark
the Nikon
Faulkner
guy. Mark's a huge fan of sub-mini. I know quite a few people. I picked up a mini cord, which is a neat little sub-miniature TLR. It's got a little angled viewfinder at the top. I've never shot it.
I've got an Adixa 16 I'm trying to load up.
That's interesting. There's a British TLR called a microcord, but it's full size.
Yep, I have one of those too. That's just a normal 6x6 TLR. Cord is as common as a suffix as flex is with cameras.
I frequent a camera shop up in Louisville, Kentucky, at Chuck Rubin Photographics, and I was helping him clean out part of his back room a few months ago, and I found, I'm forgetting the name, I'm on the spot here, but it's the 16 millimeter camera that is it's a panoramic, so it's got the swing lens. It's not Vera wide,
Visca wide.
Visca wide, that's what it is. That's one that I've been thinking about picking up for a little while now.
And Mark Faulkner is able to pick one up, and so is Mike, and so is everybody else within about 10 seconds or so.
I had 2 a few weeks ago.
The Visca wide It's not just the Viscowide, it's the STD. So Maxwell,
Ooh.
If you really
What
want,
does that stand for, Mike?
You should be looking for an STD, Maxwell. You really want one.
Is that going to show up in the inappropriately named camera?
Really potent.
That's what I was going to say.
The STD.
We should do an episode on the best worst cameras we've ever used.
That'd be a good one. Mark, have you shot your Viscowide yet?
No, I was actually waiting to get another canister for it. My the puppy had gotten a hold of one of the two, and so I had to order a new canister online. Now that I have it, I'm planning on using it.
You're going to be here this weekend. I have I have 5 because I have an unopened magazine too. So
all right, maybe I will, because the one that came says it was unopened, but it was clearly open. I'm not sure it will still work, but I'll bring it this weekend.
Okay, Mark's coming to play this weekend. Maybe I'll see some people that have been on the show before. I love the idea of doing a Fuji show. Fuji has the potential to be just as equal film as digital. You know, even though we do spend a lot of time on film, you know, as you've seen, we're all fans of digital as well. I definitely, you know, surprisingly, we've never dedicated a show to Soviet cameras either. You know, Vlad Kern has not been on the show since we were in the single digits. So I want to get him back on, see if we could eke some new stories that haven't been told before, because that's just such a rich photo industry. People have been asking for a large format show. One thing I do want to put this disclaimer out there, you know, I incessantly remind people that this is the open source show and we depend on you guys for topics. I am flattered at the belief that many of our listeners have that Paul, Theo, Anthony, and I know everything there is to know about cameras, but we really don't. There's been many times people have proposed a topic that it's like, hey, that sounds interesting, but I don't know what I'm going to say about it. You might be surprised to know I have never, to this very day, ever shot a single large format camera at all. So if you want to hear a whole Camerosity episode where Mike doesn't say a word, that would be one. So please believe me, there are topics I am game. I would be interested. I would like to learn some of this stuff too, but you know, we don't know everything. So we do actually need you guys that do want to talk about something to come on and, you know, kind of help us along. Cause like I said, anything's on the table. It's just, we may not actually know a lot about what some of the suggestions are.
We're scouring the world for King Regular Expert.
King Regular Experts. We want to get Robert Shamebrook back on. There's the recent announcement Kodak made of their commitment to continuing to make film for as long as there's demand. And I was talking to him. Well, for one, he let me know that his book, Making Kodak Film, had actually gone out of print for a while, but he's resumed selling it. So he has new books in stock. And I talked to him. Well, we were on our August break, so it's actually been a couple weeks. I need to reach back out to him, but we want to kind of do a follow up and kind of see the state of the photography industry, film photography industry now. But yeah, I mean, we haven't done a Euro episode. It's been over a year. You know, we've had great engagement with some of our German listeners in the UK. You know, we've had a couple South African people call us too. So there's a lot of people. In fact, I had got an email from a guy in Norway that wanted to talk about shutters. And I thought that was a great idea. But, you know, to get someone from Norway on with their time zone is just kind of difficult. So, Mina, you have any suggestions for us?
There were a couple of suggestions I popped into the chat, I think, earlier on. A couple of them, are very much lightning round topics.
The one that got away, right?
Yeah, the one that got away, and seller's remorse. I was having a lot of seller's remorse over the weekend, having cycled through a series of cameras in the last 12 to 18 months. One of them was actually a Leica Flex, and this goes back to Theo's comment a couple of episodes ago around trying to source a Leica R body that works. So eventually I actually got a Leica Flex again because I just had enough of the electronics. I was like, no, it's fine. I'll just go back to mechanical. That's the first SL. So just the SL, not the 2. I don't know if it was you, Mike, or it was this podcast. It may have been the CCR when they were talking about the Nikon F locking when the mirror goes down.
That was us.
It was you guys, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I was, as you do, you're fiddling around with your cameras, and I realized that the Flex does it as well. You can't move the mirror.
Right. So what he's talking about is if you take the lens off a Nikon F, and apparently the Leica Flex is the same way, you cannot physically raise the mirror. It is locked. So that's done to prevent any kind of bounce. You know, a lot of mirrors, when they go up and down, they bounce a little bit. So there's like a catch on those cameras that catch it. And Bob Rodoloni explained it that even with the motor drive mounted to the original Nikon F, it releases the lock, the mirror flips up, shutter fires, mirror flips back down, lock, unlock, mirror flips back up, you know, and it kind of goes through that cycle, and it's able to do that without any bounce whatsoever. And even as recently as the F2, they got rid of that. So if you have a Nikon F2, take the lens off, you can bounce the mirror with your finger. I mean, I wouldn't
can't do it with the flex.
Don't do that with a lot of force, but
I'm
if
sure
you want,
it'll crack.
yeah. But so that's cool. I did not know that, the Leica flex, but it doesn't surprise me though either.
Yeah, the way that it just comes all the way down and does not, and you can't feel it vibrating either. So on slower speeds, when I shoot at like an eighth or a quarter, it definitely doesn't reverberate in the body, and it's quite a thick body as well. The other topic that Howard, yours is very similar to what I was having in mind, which was how many cameras have you bought more than once? It's actually a whole format. I was talking to a friend over the weekend saying to him, I think I've accepted that I'm just romanticizing the rangefinder, but I buy them over and over, and I enjoy holding them and like the kinesthetic appeal, but I don't enjoy the output. Like, even though I love the way they look, rangefinders don't seem to produce for me the output that I would want, and I think it's because, you know, you're contending with slightly different composition. You're not getting an SLR style composition.
What I meant by the question, how many cameras have you owned more than once? Not in terms of like sometimes you're a collector, you want a black one and a chrome one of the same thing. I meant how many times have you bought something, sold it on, had seller's remorse, bought another one?
I've bought the Nikon F4 4 times. I've bought the FM2 3 times and the F4 4 times. Although they're SLRs, they've never really meshed with me.
Have you ever bought the exact same camera back? Paul.
Yes, once.
Paul's done that. Oh, you have? Okay.
I've done it a number of times. I bet I've owned 20 Hasselblads.
The same one.
No,
the same
different ones.
Back and forth, just constantly.
But yeah, talking about, you know, seller's remorse and cameras that, well, so far I haven't bought repeatedly, but my very silky sweet Leica M3 was part of my trade to Paul for the G617. And I was like, oh, I've got so many rangefinders, and I'm never going to be able to, you know, afford all the lenses that I want for the Leica. And I'm really focused on the contacts. And then Paul starts posting these like M2s and M3s, and I look at them and think, oh God, I miss that camera. Maybe I should sell a few things and talk to Paul. Maybe I need an M2.
Anthony, seriously, save yourself some money. You're a fan of the Voigtländer brand. I know they're not real Voigtländers, but seriously, you should check out one of the Bessas. The Cosina Bessas. The viewfinder on those are glorious.
I know. I evaluated a passel of them for Paul about 2 months ago.
So you have shot one then.
Oh, I played around with them. I didn't shoot it, but it made sure it was all working.
You'll find them. They're a hell of a lot cheaper than a Leica M. If you love rangefinders, you can get them in the M mount. You can get them in the M39 mount. They even make a contacts mount version. If you want a nice rangefinder that's reliable, those, you know, have metering, you know, so they're even a little bit more modern, but they're a heck of a lot cheaper.
I hope whoever ended up with my M3 appreciates how nice that camera was.
Maybe you'll buy it back.
If it's one camera that I definitely do miss and I would buy back in a heartbeat, and I can't find them in Australia for whatever reason, it's the Contax RTS2. Can't find it.
RTS2 is great. Stay away from the RTS3. That camera is so
That's motor driven, right? Like
100%. It's completely electronic. Those cameras are just going to die no matter what. But the RTS2 is fairly robust, as is the original version. But I want to make a recommendation to you, Mina. If you want to give a rangefinder one more try, one that I love, and it's I don't know how easy you could find it, but look for an AGFA Karat.
I have the 4, the AGFA Karat 4, which is not the same. It doesn't have the 2 windows.
Correct. Yep. You need one of these so it has the 2 half windows. And I have terrible vision. I don't know if that's your problem, but with rangefinders, I do often struggle with the tiny patches. And what I like about the Karat, and then there's an Ansco version, called the Caromat, but I suspect it's going to be even harder to find in Australia. But these cameras, the rangefinder and the viewfinder is the exact same window. So you basically have a top half of an image and a bottom half of the image. And when you move them to line them up perfectly, that's when your rangefinder's in focus. There's no beam splitter.
So it's like your actual view is the wedges, not the wedges are flicking. Yeah, okay.
Right, but it's full size, so you see the whole image. So you compose and you focus with the rangefinder in the exact same window, and they're prisms. There's no beam splitters, so it's a very bright image. The issue with these cameras, though, unfortunately, which is the reason a lot of people don't recommend them, is they're green goo AGFA cameras. So the lubricant that was used on the helix on these always hardens. So you do need to find one that's been serviced.
That's that cement problem, right? Like it just gums up to the point. Yeah. All right.
But if you find a Karat that's working and smooth, I promise you, if you're hesitant or rangefinder averse, this is the rangefinder to get. I love these cameras, and I wish more companies made them like this. And when they went to the AGFA 4 or the Karat 4 that went to a traditional beam splitter, it ruined the entire benefit of the whole camera for me, at least.
I did like the lens, like the Soligon 50 f2 is very underrated. And for whatever reason, not only did they cheapen out on that viewfinder or rangefinder mechanism, but I don't know why, but they went down to a 300th of a second shutter. Whilst I think the older ones are like the Retinas. They're a 500th, a typical 500 speed. The 4 went down to a 300th. Yeah.
Mina, next time we meet up, I can bring my Karat along so you can have a bit of a play if you like.
Well, the next camera market's in October, so I'll see you then. Yeah.
So have you two actually met before?
Yeah, once or twice on a photo walk and at the camera market. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Well, it's been a pleasure. I'm glad to be back. As you guys have heard, we have a wide variety of topics that we're going to go over. We never know what order things are going to be and who knows what's going to come up. I have a list of people. I don't like to say their names because it'll jinx it, and there's a huge chance it'll never happen. But I'm always trying to reach out to people who I think would be great to talk to, interesting people. I love having the diverse topics that we talk about, brand-specific shows. Anything's on the table. So if you have a suggestion for us, we haven't talked about it, there might be a reason. Again, I am flattered that you guys hold us in such high regard that we know everything there is to know. Well, we do not. So if there's something that you've heard us avoid, there's a good chance we just don't have a lot to say about it. So please come and teach us something too, because one of my favorite things about the show is all the things that I learned too. So, and I feel like I speak for the other guys too in that as well. We're gonna get back to our normal 2-week cadence of recording. So today is Monday the 18th. We'll try to get this episode out by the end of this week. We will be back with episode 56 on Monday, October 2nd. So look for the show announcement, a couple of days before that, like we typically like to do. We welcome anybody. We would love to hear some people new to film photography. Jim Gray, another blogger, friend of mine and Theo's, did a recent survey of readers of his site, and asked them to reveal their age and profession. And it wasn't a surprise that 60% of the people that read his age are baby boomers or older Gen X. And the most common occupation is retired. So I would love to get some more younger people to join us and just talk about film photography, because it's such a fun subject and you keep hearing about how there's this big resurgence. So please join us.
On October 7th, I'm going to be in Atlanta for the KEH Film Stock, which is sort of like a gathering of the hippest of the youngest YouTubers and Instagram influencers. And then I'll just be like, the fly in the ointment, the old guy with the Kodak medalist around his neck.
Is that where they open up their retail shop for people to buy stuff from the warehouse?
Well, they now have a full retail shop at the warehouse.
Okay.
Where you can actually get on the computer and call up anything, and they'll have somebody run it out from the depths. But no, this is going to be a guided photo walk through the core of Atlanta, starting at the Ponce City Market, and then a sort of a massive beers and camera at one of the local brew pubs.
Awesome.
And I know that Atlanta Film Company and I think Cinestill and several camera manufacturers and film manufacturers and distributors will be there as well. Yeah. So look for the old guy with the Camerosity yellow t-shirt and I'll be there.
All right.
Some weird collection of cameras
Yeah.
in my old stomping grounds.
Well, that sounds like fun.
If I may add just one last thing, I wanted to very, very quickly shill a store that I've been sort of helping out with. If you're in Louisville, Kentucky, or anywhere around there, I would highly, highly recommend Chuck Rubin Photographics. I've been not working for him, but sort of forcing my way into helping him with his store in the last few months, and it's a treasure trove of things. So if you're in Louisville, Kentucky, go there.
Awesome.
It's great.
Yeah, Chuck's a good guy. You can't go wrong buying something from Chuck.
Awesome.
Oh yeah.
Well, if you're ever in those shops and you can do a bit of work with them to create inventories, there are camera enthusiasts down under who are absolutely screaming for stuff because not a whole lot came down here.
Yeah, he's got trash bags, or he once told me he had a trash bag of just Connie Omega dark slides.
Send a trash bag, Maxwell.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. We're glad to be back. We will see you guys in 2 weeks, and we'll have the show out in a couple days. So you guys have a good rest of your night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. All right, there's 4 people in the waiting room. We should probably get started.
You're right, Anthony.
Yeah.
No, you were right. You said 4 people in the chat in the Facebook
yeah.
feed.
I meant just the 4 of us, though.
I don't think we're classified as callers unless I've been demoted somehow.